Good morning, everyone. Happy Sabbath. Thank you for that beautiful item of music. What a joy to be able to worship our great God together. It's good to be in God's house. Wonderful joy to see you and to be able to share God's word with you. I don't know if Steve and Nimrod are trying to get me back, but they said I needed to preach on the sanctuary in the book of Revelation, which is a very difficult subject. But with God's help, we'll see how we go today. Now, I just want you to make sure that the clicker is working. There you go. I don't know if I'll finish at 12. Last week, my friend Hensley did very well in finishing timeously. I will try to match that today. My wife and I are delighted to be here, and it's a joy to be able to worship with you. The hurricane of COVID-19 has decimated our world. Low pressure system, the virus jumping from an animal to a human being in Wuhan, that's still under speculation. Recently, President Biden has ordered an investigation into the root cause of this low pressure system developing there in Wuhan. But that low pressure system developed and it began to swirl and grow in intensity and has ravaged this terrestrial ball we call home. Millions of people have lost their jobs. More importantly, millions of people have passed on. Homes, families, lives, and individuals have no longer been the same in what we now term COVID-19, this hurricane that has pressurized the global system and has caused havoc right across societies and communities and families. I was struck by the intensity of the disease when a cousin of mine in South Africa, through his COVID-19 experience, felt that he was at the door of death. A terrible, nightmarish experience that he went through, and finally, as he reached out and cried out and called out to God, he is now fully recovered. But that reality of COVID in my own family struck home for Shemaine and myself and for our children, for our wider family, and for other families. This has been a painful, devastating experience when loved ones have been taken. The hurricane has wreaked havoc across the planet. On a more personal level this morning, what pressures are you experiencing? The pressure of family, the pressure of health, the pressure of finances, the pressure of future. We live in a pressurized world, not just corporately and globally, but on a personal, intimate level. We're all experiencing some kind of pressurized environment, some kind of pressurized situation. The church communities in Western Asia Minor were under pressure as well. Whether you traveled in Laodicea, you visited Sardis, or you went to Smyrna, these 7 communities of faith that John wrote to on the Isle of Patmos were experiencing external and internal pressure. Externally, Domitian was the ruler at that time. He had been claiming divine prerogatives and seeking worship. Prior to him, Caligula in the 30s of the 1st century, Nero in the 50s of the 1st century, had already been seeking homage and allegiance and worship. And now Domitian, the last of the Flavian rulers, also sought worship. When you entered one of these towns, in the center of the town would be an image of the emperor. And you were expected in some way to pay homage to the emperor. Beyond that, Roman society was polytheistic. And so the Roman system was designed so that the top of the pantheon of gods was always the emperor. And beneath the emperor were a variety of local gods that were worshipped. And so you were enticed and allured to worship these local gods. If you were a tradesman, you were a fisherman, you were a farmer, you would seek help from these gods for your day-to-day existence. And so the allurement to worship these different gods to just get by on a day-by-day basis put pressure on these early Christ followers. We know in the early 60s, Nero had already brought about persecution in the Roman Colosseum. Christians were savagely and brutally killed for mockery and sport in the 50s and 60s under Nero's rule. By the time the 90s came along, 95, 96 is the scholarly date most would put the book of Revelation, Antipas had already been killed. And so the threat of persecution loomed large for these early Christians. Not only that, but local sporadic harassment was a reality for them as they sought to follow Jesus. Internally, Jezebel, the Nicolaitans, and the Balaamites had infiltrated the church. They had advocated accommodation to the values and the vices of the Roman Empire. And so the virtues of the Christian faith were being undermined and undervalued at every turn. It's okay to follow Jesus and Caesar. It's okay to say a little prayer to that God and also follow Jesus. You've got to care for your family. It's okay to swing by that temple and say a quick prayer and then go home and connect with Jesus. This is the kind of accommodation that Jezebel and the Nicolaitans advocate. And so pressure externally, pressure internally for these fledgling communities of faith spread across Western Asia Minor in their loyalty and in their allegiance to Jesus Christ. We turn to the opening vision, Revelation 1, reading from verse 12. I turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me. And when I turned and saw 7 golden lampstands, and among the lampstands was someone like a son of man, dressed in a robe, reaching down to his feet and with a golden sash around his chest. The hair on his head was white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his hand he held 7 stars, and coming out of his mouth was a sharp, double-edged sword. His face was like the sun shining in all its brilliance. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. And he placed his right hand on me and said, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and now look, I am alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys of death and Hades. Write, therefore, what you've seen, what is now and what will take place later. The mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand and of the 7 golden lampstands is this: the 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches." John's Bible is the Old Testament, and John in particular loves the book of Daniel. Ellen White says emphatically that when God's people understand the book of Daniel and Revelation, there will be a revival among us such as has never been. Notice the parallels between Revelation 1 and Daniel 10. Clearly, John is drawing on the story of Daniel 10 and the man that appears there and the battle that is going to ensue between Michael and the adversary in the nations that are seeking to discover God's will and God's plan in Daniel chapter 10. Many years ago, the English scholar, I must make reference to the English at times, the English scholar Charles Harold Dodd, 1952, seems quite dated, but Dodd discovered that the Old Testament context within which a text is alluded to or quoted must be imported into its New Testament context as we attempt to make meaning. Brilliant insight from Dodd that a range of other New Testament scholars have built on. And so, if we look at that Daniel 10 context, what's happening there? We, in fact, need to take this Danielic context and seek to import it into Revelation 1 to unpack what's happening here in Revelation chapter 1. In Daniel 10, the certain man is being portrayed as a man of war, a man who is now going to engage in battle. This is the image that John draws on here in Revelation chapter 1. Now, notice I've put a couple of things in red, and the good gentleman at the back, I've forgotten his name, but he's Lisa's better half, put some stuff in yellow for me, so thank you to him. The words in red and the words in yellow, in fact, come from Daniel chapter 7. So, in fact, John is not just drawing from Daniel 10, but also Daniel 7, a majestic, magnificent, composite, pictorial representation of Jesus. No one text can adequately portray the majesty and magnificence of Jesus. And so John has to draw from a range of texts. He also draws from the clothing of the high priest. And so rightly so, this is a picture of Jesus as a man of war. It's a picture of Jesus as high priest. And it's a picture of Jesus with the imagery of the Ancient of Days of Daniel chapter 7. Wow! What a picture of Jesus, equal to and is indeed the Ancient of Days, ready to engage in battle on behalf of his people. The Son of Man, who knows the struggles and the vicissitudes and the challenges of life. Interestingly, the menorah structure. Notice that Jesus is amongst the 7 golden lampstands. Here's the menorah. The menorah is the candlestick within the sanctuary. And the book of Revelation is in fact structured on the 7 golden lampstands, the candelabra or the menorah. It's interesting that the motif of the Jewish festivals, in fact, forms a beautiful background paradigm within which to understand the book of Revelation. Adventist scholar Jacques Ducan has done the most significant work in attempting to highlight the Jewish festival background of the book of Revelation. Now, Nimrod and Steve may need to invite me down the track to unpack all of this for you, but this is just a little taste of this background for our consideration. When the pressure is on, I want you to notice that Jesus is with us. And among the lampstands was someone like a son of man. The Arch of Titus was built in recognition of the defeat that Titus inflicted on the Jewish people in 66 to 70 AD. If you're walking up toward the Arch of Titus, on the left, you will see Titus championing the exploits of his victory. The Jewish people carrying the menorah, carrying the 7 golden candelabras. You see, it has always been the existential yearning of God's people, particularly in times of trial and difficulty. Where are you, God? Jesus is with us. In the Garden of Eden, he walks in the cool of the day with Adam and Eve. The promise made over and over again in the Old Testament, I am with you. God was with his people through the highs and lows of the history of Israel. Jesus with his disciples. In Mark 3, he says, in fact, calling out to his disciples, come and be with me. Isn't that beautiful? Come and be with me. God is the God who is with us. And so here, yes, the pressurized situation of external and internal conflict, but amongst the 7 golden candelabras is Jesus Christ. I was standing in Kohl's yesterday, and I saw someone in front of me with gray hair, a gray-haired person who was quite a snazzy dresser. It was my friend, Dr. John Shapashek. I joined him to take the lesson in the fellowship hall, and that is a beautiful lesson that John shared. But this is a question that I must give tribute to John. John has always stirred me with his spiritual and intellectual conversation, and this is his question. I've got to footnote him and give him credit. How do we discern the movement of God's Spirit in our lives? When the pressure is on, how do we know that God is with us? When we are frazzled and frantic, how do we know that God is with us? This morning, our feelings are the shallowest part of who we are. Salvation is the deepest work of God. God will not do his deepest work in the shallowest part of who we are. We don't feel God's presence. We know God's Spirit by faith. If you want light, you have to stand where the light is shining. And in fact, light obeyed increases light. The more we attune ourselves to the voice of God, the more distinct that voice will become by faith. And so when the pressure is on, you need to know, and I need to know, God is with us. And God is with you by faith. That reality of his person can indeed be his presence and his peace in your life. When the pressure is on, Jesus meets our needs. Whatever peculiar needs you have this morning, Jesus can meet your needs. It's fascinating that this opening portrayal of Jesus in Revelation chapter 1, verses 12 to 20, the focus of our study, is then beautifully unpacked in Revelation chapter 2 and Revelation chapter 3. Each of the unique qualities displayed by Jesus in the characteristics there is beautifully applied to the needs of each church in Revelation 2 and 3. Notice, Jesus walks among the church at Ephesus. Why? Because they've lost their first love, and lovers normally go for long walks. My wife and I celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary this year. I know, it's not much looking at all of you. But we were quite chuffed at ourselves. And I can remember some beautiful walks Charmaine and I would go on. We'd be holding hands and we'd be talking and sharing. And of course, the walk always ended with a with a lovely kiss. I can say that, can I? Amen. Thank you, Pastor. I've got your blessing. So he meets the specific need of Ephesus. Notice, he's the first and the last for the church at Smyrna. Why? And remember, Antipas has been killed. Jesus, as the first and last, has conquered death. The unique need of each church is beautifully met by Jesus. Dad was a teacher. Mom was a seamstress, working at a hospital, sewing the gowns. And their stuttering, clamoring, young 17-year-old son felt called by God to be a minister. Off to Heidelberg College, Cape Town, South Africa. And I love Adventist education, and so does my wife. We put our children through Avenel School, and God has blessed them because of that journey. But Adventist education is expensive. And my parents just couldn't afford to send me there. But Dad did what he could to make it work. And I was on a bus, interstate bus, and down to Cape Town to study at Heidelberg College. And I knew that my parents were really struggling to make ends meet so that I could be there studying. You know, every holiday, God provided me with a job. I remember one of my jobs was I worked for, hold on now, CIW Plumbers. And my job was to get in there and make sure those toilets shone. I remember another job when I was at Heidelberg. And this job, I was in the sheds at the back there, right at the back in the farm. I don't know if you went to Heidelberg, Francois, but right there in the back in the sheds, I was there with the horses and the cattle, cleaning out all of that hay, making sure that, when Mr. Francois Joubert came there, that shed was spotless. It was a smelly place to work, but God really took me through the trenches, but always provided for my needs. I remember heading off to work in Johannesburg, night shift. I don't know, 20-year-old kid. I'm working night shift with my cousin, and I remember he said to me, Kayle, whenever the boss comes around, look busy. It was a great tip, So 2 o'clock in the morning when the boss came around, I'd be there, Very, very busy. And of course, once the boss left at 3 o'clock in the morning, I would take a nap. But I remember heading off to the bank when I'd gotten my paycheck, and I had a wad of money. I'd never seen so much money as a 20-year-old kid in all my life, and I put it in both pockets, and I think I had some in my pants pockets as well. Thank you, Jesus, I can pay for Heidelberg. Every need I've had, God has been able to supply. When the pressure is on, God comes through. And He uniquely meets the need of every single church in Revelation 2 and 3. And this morning, my God, your God, can meet the needs that are in your life. When the pressure is on, perspective is everything. I visited South Africa a couple of years ago, invited on a preaching gig, and I went into to a black township. It was just a vibrant experience, just moving around and getting a feel for the place of my birth, having been away for so many years. And so I was moving around, taking a couple of pics here and there, in the nitty gritty. Isn't this fellow cute? And I was right there in the thick of things. Perspective is everything. On this particular trip, I was most definitely playing second fiddle to Dr. Carlton Bird. And so along with Dr. Bird, we got to take a helicopter ride across the city of Johannesburg. A very different picture. The 2010 Soccer World Cup was played in this stadium. You see, when the pressure is on, perspective is everything. If you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. When the pressure is on, we need heaven's perspective. And while I was down there rubbing elbows with just ordinary folk in the township, when I got into this helicopter and I got a different perspective I'd never seen of the city. This was a tiny glimpse of a different perspective. When the pressure is on, we need heaven's perspective. We need to be reminded this morning that this world is indeed in the hands of God. Revelation 11:19. It's at the seam. It's at the seam at the end of the historical section. Kenneth Strand, noted Adventist scholar, saw Revelation 1 to 11 as historical, Revelation 12:22 as eschatological. So right in the seam, 19, right in the seam, check it out. Then God's temple in heaven was opened, and within this temple was seen the ark of his covenant. And there came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and a severe hailstorm. Notice the allusion to the Ark of the Covenant at the very center of the book of Revelation. And of course, if we take Dodd's comment on board, that the wider literary and thematic context must be considered when John alludes to an Old Testament story, then we need to consider the sanctuary service right here in the seam. What was God's desire in Exodus 25:8? Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. There's the heart of God, to be in the midst with his people. But notice the ark. Where was the ark of the covenant? You know as well as I do, the ark of the covenant was in the most holy place. You see, when the pressure is on, the safest place to be is in an internal room. Most hurricane specialists would say if there's no fear of danger, the best place when a hurricane strikes is the basement. The best place when a hurricane strikes is the internal room. The most holy place. The most holy place. When the pressure is on, that's where you can go. The Ark of the Covenant. Where? In the most holy place. The heart of God. The heart of God. Right here. Right here in the juxtaposition between the historical 1 to 11 and the eschatological 12:22 is the heart of God, to be with his people. And what's there? The Shekinah glory. The Shekinah glory. And let's look a little deeper. God's law. God's law. And God's law is a transcript of who God is. It's a reflection of his character of agape. Right there in the heart of the book of Revelation is God's love. And God's desire to be in relationship with his people. If we look at the Ten Commandments, it's about redemption. relationship, and then rules. The rules don't come first. It's redemption, it's relationship, and it's then rules. And here we find the rules on how to do life. But it's in the context of relationship, and it's preceded by redemption. And so, yes, events are going to unfold in chapter 12. A sea beast and a land beast will emerge on the apocalyptic landscape. But listen, the heart of God, when the pressure is on, we need to know heaven's perspective. Revelation 14, 9 and 10. A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and his image and receives its mark on their forehead or on their hand, they too will drink the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. They'll be tormented with burning sulfur. Notice now, in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. There's a sense in which you can never escape the presence of the Lamb. The irony of the verse before us this morning is that the Lamb had already taken the cup. The Lamb had drunk from the dregs of this cup of God's wrath so that no human being would ever need to taste the bitterness of this cup. And now those who have chosen to be rebellious and recalcitrant are tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the one who had already drank the cup, the Lamb. And I think for a moment what that would be like for the Lamb. I think for a moment in the Lamb's very presence, those who have spurned the offers of his grace over and over and over again, finally receive their just recompense. You see, the God we serve is both merciful and just. He is both righteous and holy. He is both kind and righteous. The God we serve will act, and where will he act from? He will act from his sanctuary, meting out judgment on willful human beings who have spurned his offers of grace, amazing grace, and have chosen their own path. When the pressure is on, remember that the future is in the hands of Jesus. This terrestrial ball we call home is not out of control at the whim and dictate of human power, of human ingenuity or human prowess. It is under the control of God. And its destiny is in the hands of King Jesus. When the pressure is on, remember that the future is in the hands of Jesus. Notice, in his right hand he held 7 stars. The local god in that first century context, in terms of the imagery of Revelation 1, is the god Hecate, Hekate, the goddess Hecate. And this goddess held the stars in her hand. So there's a polemic here, isn't there? John is saying, Hecate, you don't hold the stars in your hand. Jesus does. Don't be afraid. The future is nothing to be afraid of, because the God who holds yesterday, today, also holds tomorrow in his hand. He declares, I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and now look, I'm alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys of Hades and of death. When the pressure is on, Jesus is with us. When the pressure is on, He's able to meet our needs. When the pressure is on, we need heaven's perspective. And the pressure is on, the future is in the hands of Jesus. Diamonds are made under pressure. It's the pressure that moves and shapes and impacts that molten rock, that beneath the surface of that hardened rock, something spectacular emerges, a diamond. You and I go through these moments of pressure, but God is refining us into His glory, into His image, into His stature. He is with us as we go through the journey of life and as we go through these closing moments in human history. My dad had a Mitsubishi Colt Galant, some years ago now. I'm thinking back to when I was probably about 15 or 16 years old. And every Friday, Dad would get me to clean the car. That was my Friday job. If I didn't get it done on Friday, Sunday morning, I'd be cleaning the car. I'd use the hose pipe. I'd wash it down firstly and then just use the hose pipe. But when I wanted to get, especially to the tires and under the tires, and I would apply a bit of pressure to the front, the tip of that hose. And as I applied the pressure, the water came out faster, and the water went further. You see, the pressure is the design of God. The challenges and the trials that we go through in life are all part of the design of God. The design of God to smooth, refine each of our hearts, each of our lives. And then to help us to move forward, to propel us forward, even in our moments of pressure, to move us forward and further, knowing that He's with us, knowing that He'll meet our needs, knowing that we can have heaven's perspective, and knowing that the future is in the hands of Jesus.